Now that we know how to use PyCharm to create powerful Python projects using packages, virtual environments, and version control, let's dive right into creating high-quality Python code. To do this, we're going to talk about Python's coding standard, which is called PEP8. In order to put the final polishing touches on our code, we will discuss how to evaluate our project using Pylint. From there, we'll look at PyCharm's Debugger, which will allow us to pause and step through our program as it executes. This is particularly helpful in our program runs, but gives us unexpected and potentially wrong answers. Next, let's say we find out what is causing those wrong answers. We probably want to make sure that they don't happen again in the future. We can ensure our high-quality code will be resistant to unexpected inputs by using unit tests and assertions. From there, PyCharm's unit test runner will give us the ability to ensure our programs continue to perform as expected, regardless of any changes we might make. We'll wrap up this section by talking about file templates in PyCharm, which will save us some time and effort, reduce redundant coding, and help create consistency across our project. So let's begin by talking about Python coding standards. First, we introduce PEP8 guidelines and provide a couple of examples. We'll then show how PyCharm already warns of PEP8 compliance issues, and also allows us to customize these guidelines to meet our own style guides, to meet our own coding standards. The beautiful part, and by far my favorite part of Python, is the emphasis on producing user-friendly code. In fact, we commonly hear about code being Pythonic, meaning not only does the code technically and functionally run and give us an answer, but the code itself is as human-readable as possible. Python's style guide is called PEP8, which stands for Python Enhancement Proposals. These standards ensure our code is polished, professional, and consistent across projects and engineering teams. It is okay to break these guidelines if you have a reason to, but unless you have a very specific reason, please do everybody a favor and just follow them. There are many guidelines covered in PEP8. Let's look at just a couple of examples so we can get a feel of what I'm talking about when I say style guidelines. And hopefully we can see how these minor style choices can really help improve the readability of our code. Let's start by talking about how we choose to name our classes and functions. Let's consider my sandwich calculator class example from previous videos. PEP8 recommends using camel case for class names, which is to say capitalize the first letter of all the words and put them together without any spaces, underscore, dashes, or any other character to separate these words. For example, let's say I want to name my calculator class Sandwich Calculator. It should look like this. The guidelines for naming functions is a little bit different. Let's say that within my calculator class, I have a family discount function, which reports how much to charge for family members. Under PEP8, I should name this function using all lowercase letters and separating the words with an underscore. The second example that we're covering today has to do with indentations. Indentations are critical in Python as they tell us which lines of code belong where. We could technically only use a single space as an indentation, as long as it's consistently used throughout our program. However, this would be very obnoxious for us to attempt to read, especially as our code grows larger and we have many different levels of indentations. PEP8 Indentation Guidelines specify using 4 spaces as an indentation. Here we see side-by-side examples to illustrate this concept. Notice how the last for loop on the right is much less clear where it belongs. Does it get executed inside the first for loop? And these are only 2 of PEP8's guidelines. With all of these guidelines, it can seem overwhelming to try to follow them as we move forward in our programming. Fortunately, PyCharm already catches PEP8 violations, as well as makes suggestions on how to fix them. Let's go to PyCharm to see a few examples and how we can customize PyCharm for our individual needs. Here we are looking at the spacing example from the slides. Just as before, we can use PyCharm's lens mode to see there are gray lines underneath them. In fact, if we hover over them, you can see in very clear declaration, this is a PEP8 violation. And as we mentioned before, there should be 4 spaces for an indentation, which again, lens mode is helping. So let's go ahead and let PyCharm fix it for us. We get our handy yellow light bulb, we click, and if I decided that I want to ignore spacing issues, I could just ignore issues like this and PyCharm would stop telling me about it. However, there's no reason for only 1 space, so I'm going to go ahead and click Reformat File. We'll see PyCharm automatically fixed everything for me. And more reassuring yet, we have this green check mark. Now let's say that I want to define my own style guide. I can specify that in PyCharm pretty easily as well. We're going to go File, Settings, and under the Editor tag, we expand it. We can see a code style option. go ahead and expand that one as well, and we'll go right down to Python. We'll see we're given a number of options. So let's begin with the fors, which we already know is PEP8 indentation. I could change that here if I wanted to use a different number for some reason, but let's do something a little more interesting. If we go over to the Spaces tab, we're going to look at where we should put spaces within our code. Helpfully on the right, we have a preview of how these changes will affect our code. So let's say that I don't want to assign a space around operators such as equals, plus, equals. I can simply uncheck mark that, and we can see PyCharm's preview got rid of those spaces. Let's add it again, and you can see the preview really highlights the changes in our definition.